Hey y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and in today's video, we are going to talk about the dangers of overpricing your home in a hot housing market. As a real estate agent in Seattle, Washington, and Bellevue, Washington, and all the surrounding suburbs, I've experienced one of the hottest housing markets for probably the last 5-6 years in the entire US. And most people, I think, in a hot housing market think that their house is just going to sell. And I've heard comments like that from people sometimes in listing appointments and from others. Oh, it doesn't really matter who you work with, it's just gonna sell, and you could sell your house yourself, it's just gonna sell. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about home pricing strategy and ultimately what gets a home sold and the value of real estate agents, all those kind of things. But today, I just wanna talk specifically about the dangers of overpricing your house. Now, as we think about pricing strategy is, in my opinion, one of the key parts of any successful marketing plan that a real estate agent can put together. And so for me, when we're thinking about how we're gonna prep the house, how we're gonna present the house, what it's gonna look like, what's the online marketing gonna look like, the price to me is a huge, huge factor of that. And the pricing strategy that you use will ultimately dictate how successful the listing is, regardless of the marketing that you're doing online. And even in a hot housing market, houses sit. And what's the reason for that? Why do houses sit on the market when most things are selling in a week or less? And the main answer to that is that the house is overpriced. Now, there are reasons that maybe your house isn't selling, and I've talked about some of those in a different video, and I talk about some different reasons. But ultimately, no matter what the issues are, whether it's a bad location or the house needs some work, the right price is going to cause the house to sell. And that's ultimately the goal when you're listing your house, is you want to get it sold, but you also want to get the most money for it. And I think if you were to look at every single seller, they're going to tell you they want to get the most amount of money, and they also want to sell their house in the shortest amount of time. And some people, I think, equate selling their house quickly with getting less money. And honestly, as we look through these different dangers of pricing your house too high, overpricing your house, I think we're gonna see that a lot of times you get more money for your house and sell quicker together. It's a combo, they go together, they go hand in hand. And usually when your house is taking longer to sell, it also usually ends up getting you a lower price. So let's talk about some of these risks and dangers of pricing your house too high from the get-go. We're gonna jump in now to the 6 different dangers or risks, in my opinion, of pricing your house too high. I'm currently in Seattle, Washington, one of the hottest real estate markets in the country for multiple years in a row now. And I think these same dangers of overpricing your house apply in any market, and any market, any market conditions as well. So these same dangers are going to apply, but they're even more so amplified in a hot housing market. The first danger, in my opinion, to overpricing your house is that it's not going to show up in the search results. Now, at first you might think, what? Why not? I mean, everybody's looking online, they're gonna see all the houses. First off, most buyers and agents are relying on online search engines to help filter out listings. And there are tons and tons of different houses on the market, whether you're in Seattle, Bellevue, in the suburbs, and if you're not in my market, same applies in your city. But you have to find ways to narrow down the options. There's so much information, but we need to narrow it down. And so these online search engines, whether it's Redfin or Zillow or Realtor.com, or if you're an agent, the MLS, these search engines help a lot. The second danger to overpricing your house is that your house is likely going to have fewer showings. And if you price your house too high, you're going to be competing with houses that are better. Buyers are going to be looking at houses that are priced the same as yours and seeing that they have an extra garage and more updated bathrooms or a nicer kitchen or a bigger yard. Buyers are shopping by comparison. So if your house is overpriced, you're going to be in a bracket of houses that are far better than yours. And so buyers will just not come look at it. They'll look at the price, they'll look at what it offers, they'll look at the price and what these other houses offer, and they'll plan to go see these other houses, but your house is going to become a low priority for them. As well, buyers that are in a lower bracket on their search can likely pay a little bit more or even considerably more than what they say they want to pay. But if they're not seeing it, they're not seeing it, right? It's just simple. And a buyer that is looking at a higher price point might have their search set lower to higher. So maybe your house shows up on their search, but it's the bare minimum of what they'd be looking for, but they really want to spend more. And so that buyer is probably going to stretch up and buy something nicer than your house. But if you're on the lower side and you have your house priced in a more competitive fashion, you're going to attract a buyer that maybe could stretch upwards versus a buyer that would be compromising or settling for something that they don't really want. So what I've found is that buyers who say, I can afford up to 500 can usually go higher. And those people will tend to compete and drive the price up on a house, which is ultimately going to get you the price that you want. Danger number 3 to overpricing your house is that your house sits on the market. Now, first off, in a crazy, frenzied real estate market like Seattle, you have a lot of competition. There's a lot of buyers out there. There aren't enough houses. Inventory's low. But if you price your house too high, you're not going to be getting those showings. We just talked about that, right? Because maybe you're attracting and marketing to the wrong buyers. And now your house is sitting on the market. And when your house sits on the market and you miss that 1 week mark and you get to that 2 week mark, all the buyers that are currently looking have already seen your listing. They've already passed on it for whatever reason. They thought it was overpriced, just like it is. And so you lose the momentum. You lose that frenzy that is in the market. And even in a market like Seattle, a hot real estate market with low inventory, your house can sit on the market. And if you lose the momentum, you can't really get it back. What also happens is that buyers inevitably start thinking that something is wrong with your house. Now, there could be nothing wrong with your house. It could be completely fine. But if you start to sit on the market when everything else is selling, people start to assume that there's either something wrong with the house or the location, because why else wouldn't it have already sold, right? I mean, why would another buyer looking 3 weeks down the road get a chance all of a sudden at a house without having to bid and compete? It's sitting on the market because there is something wrong, but it's not with the house or the location necessarily. It's just with the price. Every house is going to sell for the right price. And if you're watching this video and you're thinking about selling soon, you want to think about tactics. And I think a lot of times we get really emotional about our money, but we need to be more tactical about our money. We need to be more strategic about our money. And one of the most common places that people are emotional about their money is when it comes to their house. Now, it is possible to overcome this stigma of sitting on the market, but what ends up happening is you have to make a dramatic price drop, typically around 5% or more, very quickly, maybe a week in, maybe 10 days in. But once you realize that your house is overpriced, you need to make that dramatic price drop right away to hopefully recapture some of that momentum and show up on those searches again. If you don't, you're going to continue to increase the stigma potentially and continue to lose momentum. And ultimately that ends up in a reduced purchase price. I'll throw in a little bonus one on this section. If you're somebody that wants to sell your house quickly, now again, usually quick and most money go together, but if you're somebody who wants to sell your house quickly, if you overprice your house and it sits, well, your timing is thrown off. So if you're in a situation where you need to sell quicker, you definitely want to err on the side of being a little more aggressive on the list price in a lower fashion, right? Aggressive so that you can get it sold quicker versus trying to price it on the high side. The fourth danger of pricing your house too high is that it's going to need to be reduced. So a reduced purchase price would be the fourth risk of overpricing your house. And we've already talked a little bit about that in the third danger, right? Where you sit on the market, you ultimately end up reducing the price. But what happens is you're not getting showings. You're frustrated that you're not getting showings because it's a hot market. Why is my house not getting showings? And then on top of that, you are not getting any offers. So you're like, why am I not getting any offers? Everybody else is getting offers really fast. I think in a hot housing market, real estate agents get a lot more credit than they should, right? There is a lot of value that we bring to the table in these conversations, But I think maybe we get a little too much credit sometimes when the house sells above the asking price. And we don't get enough credit when the house is sitting on the market and struggling. But I think the pricing piece is huge, right? And I think education around pricing is huge. Ultimately, you as the seller get to choose what your price is no matter what advice I give. And so as a real estate agent, I don't make people list for a certain price, but I do give advice. And sometimes I get proved wrong. The house sells for even more. But it's always better, in my opinion, to be more conservative with the pricing so that you don't end up in a situation where you're sitting and chasing the market down. Because once you reduce the price, buyers are gonna hope that you'll do it again. So if your house is sitting on the market, if you haven't reduced your price already, buyers are most likely gonna offer you less than asking price. And if you have reduced the price, then they might think you're willing to do it even more because you wanna get the house sold. So inevitably, you start setting yourself up in a negative situation in the negotiations because you lose all your leverage. If you are in a hot housing market and there's not a lot out there, you have a lot of leverage for that first week because there's all these buyers, there's a lot of excitement, but you lose that leverage really quickly when your house is just sitting. Obviously, nobody else is trying to buy it really quick, so the leverage is gone, and now it's a lot more even playing field for the buyer and potentially an opportunity for the buyer to get the house below asking versus paying above the asking price. The fifth danger or risk to overpricing your house is less favorable terms. If you're a seller in a hot housing market like Seattle, you tend to get not only a higher price, but you also tend to get better terms in the negotiation because you have a lot of leverage. If 5 people are trying to buy your house, you tend to be able to get better terms. And what that means is you'll most likely get more earnest money, which is a larger good faith deposit. You might have fewer contingencies in the contract. Maybe the buyer doesn't do an inspection, or maybe the buyer is willing to forego their protections around their financing, and they're willing to risk losing their earnest money versus protecting it. And what happens is when your house is overpriced and it sits on the market, you tend to be reducing the price, but you also add contingencies. So buyers are not going to remove those contingencies. They're going to add more and more and more because ultimately the buyer wants to protect themselves and protect their earnest money, their good faith deposit. So as a seller, when there are multiple offers, you tend to get fewer contingencies, better terms, which I mentioned could be a larger earnest money, maybe a quicker closing date. Maybe they let you stay in the house for a few weeks after closing. But if your house is overpriced and it's sitting on the market, you don't tend to get those same perks that you get when there's competition. Last but not least, when your house is overpriced, you tend to have issues with the appraisal. The appraisal, if you haven't sold a house before, is a third-party evaluation. The bank is going to require that an appraiser, it comes out, looks at the property, and then compares it with other houses, just like real estate agents do when they price a house, just like buyers are doing when they're looking on Redfin or Zillow. What happens is the appraiser isn't going to be able to manufacture a higher price than what the house is worth. So if you price your house too high, even if a buyer is willing to pay it, what's going to happen is that the bank is going to require the appraisal, and then the appraisal is going to come back and it's going to be below what the purchase price is. If the appraisal comes in below the purchased amount, the buyer can walk unless the seller is willing to drop the price to the appraisal amount. So let's say you get a higher price for your house. Well, 2-3 weeks down the line, you're going to be talking about reducing your price. And I've seen it happen before. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Even in multiple offer situations, sometimes it happens. If you price your house too high from the start, there's no opportunities for some extra perks in the contract or more favorable terms like we talked about in the previous downside. When you have multiple offers in competition, sometimes buyers will remove contingencies, right? That was the fifth downside, is that you have less favorable terms. And if they're removing contingencies, or maybe they are including some perks, one of those main perks or contingencies revolves around the appraisal. So if there are multiple offers and people are competing, you might have a buyer that's willing to pay more, right? And might even get you more than what your overpriced value was for your house. But if they pay more, they might also include some protections around the appraisal. They might say, I'm willing to pay $50,000 extra to make up a low appraisal. Or they might say, you know what? If the appraisal comes in low, don't worry about it. I've got it. Financing's going to be good. It's on me. Or I lose my earnest money. So in that situation, that's way better for the seller because you know you're not going to be having to deal with the price later on. So if you overprice your house and there are appraisal issues, which isn't uncommon, then you are the one that's dropping the price and responsible for that ultimately versus the buyer in a more competitive situation. That was a lot that we just covered, and I'll admit it was a lot for me as well. But these are some of the main dangers with overpricing your house. And you'd think in a hot housing market that everything sells no matter how you price it, but that's honestly not the truth. And if you want to get the highest price for your house and also sell the quickest, you really want to consider your pricing strategy. So pay attention, stay tuned. I'll be making a video that will go with this one on some tips for how to price your house coming up soon. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I know you got some value out of it here, so please consider subscribing to my channel if you want to see other content like this. And if you don't mind giving it a thumbs up or dropping a comment below, I'd really appreciate it.